Hello, 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 and welcome to Series 2 of The Communicators, an interview cast by Parisi. I'm Nick Connor, and this week we're thrilled to have Alex Stewart join us to find out what makes an effective communicator. Alex is the founder and convener of the Bessemer Society and managing director of ACA Research, a specialist organization focused on identifying, connecting, and accelerating hard and deep technology innovation across the UK. The Bessemer Society is named after Alex's relative, Sir Henry Bessemer, the inventor who in 1856 developed the Bessemer process, introduced the first method for inexpensive mass production of high quality steel, and helped kickstart the second industrial revolution. Founded by Alex in 2015, the Society has developed and curated an executive network of more than 1,000 technology companies, founders, and technology leaders, bringing together innovation in manufacturing technology through a program of executive invitation-only events. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Nick.
Alex,
Nice
you
to be
founded
here.
the it's great to have you. Now, you founded the Bessemer Society in 2015. What was the gap you were trying to fill, and why did you feel there was a need for something like that?
The need, well, sort of have to roll back a tiny bit. It didn't come out of the blue. I had been looking at exciting, game-changing technology companies on behalf of a group called the Technology Partnership, TTP. They're a technology development company down in Cambridge, quite big, one of the big ones down here. And they asked me, I've been working with them on a contract basis, helping them in Japan, in fact, because that's my background specialty, and making introductions to companies in Japan for them. When I came back to UK in 2000 with my family in 2007 from Japan, the following year, 2008, there was the banking crisis, and their idea was to push back on that with some good news, as opposed to just keep cutting staff and panicking, which was to put out a publication, a journal, about all the exciting technologies that are being developed in the UK, and would I write it? So 3 times a year we published that journal. That's how I had the opportunity to go and look for what looks exciting in the technology space, that fits with what TTP did, which was basically hard technology, physics-based on the whole, with a bit of chemistry, not digital. And go and meet these companies, because you had to, in those days, sit down with them, spend an hour and a half, 2 hours even. They talk, tell me all their problems, and I'd edit that down into a journal piece. In the course of doing that for 8 years, I built up a substantial network of CEO founders. And it was on that basis that the thought did come to me that this group is overlooked. I think you use that word. It is exciting, amazing, actually, in my view, what they do. And maybe it could be socialized into a society or a club or some such network that would be face-to-face. So that was the idea, and how it started.
That's quite interesting. So that was 2015, and I think, like you said, I put words in your mouth, sort of, a group of technology being overlooked. It seems to me, and this is very much UK perspective, that, and this is a word, I call this a Alex phrase word, hard tech, meaning the covering is obviously deep tech, hard tech, and sort of manufactured technology, which has said anything from semiconductors to quantum computing to nuclear physics, making things, right? 2015, it was, funny enough, was the year I got into technologies, but that was within software and fintech, and putting a sector's name and put tech at the end was all the rage, and develop the software. But over that last 10 years, we saw last year, big semiconductor companies become the most valuable companies in the world. What's the journey been in that 10 years, and how have you seen, and why have you seen hard tech have a a second wind from, maybe it's sort of in the 90s where it was also, sort of quite a.
Hmm. Well, it's a struggling second wind in a way, but I think there has been a change in the wind for manufacturing in the broader sense, like robots, which are become more and more real. Semiconductors have been recognized latterly as being a fundamental technology. These foundational, fundamental, enabling, these words were definitely very familiar 10 years ago or 15 years ago or whenever. But I think you may be right. I'm a bit too close sometimes to know, but I think in the public space, in the government in particular, they have been recognized that these things are linked. You can't have software without a piece of hardware. Sometimes the hardware, some would argue, always the hardware is fundamental. Without it, nothing happens. So, and often in the hardware lies the real value, some proprietary value that you can really squeeze in a very interesting way to give you an advantage. So I would say yes. And on the semiconductor piece, the kind of the COVID, Taiwan, national security, China, ownership of the Nexperia plant down in South Wales. Suddenly, the government woke up and realised we have fabs in the UK. They didn't know that. Well, I don't think I believe some didn't actually know that. We don't just have one fab; we have quite a few, and some of them are highly strategic because we couldn't get semiconductors out of Taiwan or China because of the COVID situation. So, yes, I think that's had a big impact.
COVID seems like a catalyst, and I think the chip shortage sort of focus minds on strategic value of hard tech. But you spoke a lot about Asia there and how Asia were the leaders and how we're having semiconductor shortage came from Taiwan and China. In Obviously we've got that 10-year journey of the Bessemer Society, but also going back to your time in Japan, how different and what was done differently in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, you name it, in Asia, compared to, let's focus just on the UK. How was able to scale these companies whilst the UK sort of languished behind and got caught out in a chip shortage?
Well, yeah, I've been banging on about the importance of how Japan does things through my career. That's first started talking to government in the 1980s about this when we were putting together what not many people will remember anymore, but the ALVI program, or whatever it was called, trying to create a fifth generation computer was a big buzzword, and the UK still had 5, 6 global companies, STC, Plessey, GEC, Ferranti, come to mind, and others, so that we could appear to play in that space. But we let them all go, as with I think no exception, bar BT. BT has still R&D, but it's much less than it had. And the Japanese, over that period of time, they've had to consolidate their own number of companies, but they've always, so they're a country that struggles against China and Taiwan and against the fabulous American model or the Western model of fabulous design and manufacture in Asia. But they find their way around just by have a very much long-term planning mentality and how to optimize systems so that they stay in the game. We never have thought like that, as far as I'm aware, in the UK, in a systematic way. So Japan still has skin in the game, probably more than we realize, and can still, sustain an economy that's at the leading edge of hardware technology. But the mass production has gone to China and Asia, and they've just copied the Japanese playbook. And the Japanese took everything out from the West, we forget, in the 70s and 80s, from shipbuilding through to semiconductors, memory chips. They took out, America and so on. So the Japanese showed the way. It's all around long-term, structured, disciplined organization. It's a totally different model. And we have never had that model, and we can't too late to adopt it as such, but we can learn still from it.
And just to flip it to the good side, which also I think leads into what you're saying, into some negatives. You said to me that when you came back from Japan, you wanted to look at the positive because you met all these people. Now, and before we started recording, you were telling me about Bessemer's program this year, which is going to be in Manchester, Durham, Sheffield, Newcastle. Very much in those post-industrial or those northern industrial cities. But originally, and it's I've been lucky enough to be invited to a few Bessemer dinners, meeting people. There's definitely a twinge to Cambridge. So when I say UK, maybe we should say Cambridge. What is Cambridge doing well? And then maybe broadly to the UK of, how can we take what's been done well there and then expand it and learn those lessons from Asia?
Well, there's nothing like Cambridge in Japan. I can speak about Japan better than other countries in Asia, like Korea, say. But Cambridge, Oxford are particularly Cambridge, very exceptional. So not an easy model to transfer, really. You've got a brilliant university, started way back in the 60s with this idea that you could start to sort of try and commercialize the R&D out of it by setting up a specialist unit for that purpose, which was Cambridge, what's it called? Anyway, Cambridge Technology or something. Should know. It's a competitor to TTP that I mentioned earlier. And it just took off. It's called the Cambridge phenomenon because it can't fully be explained. But it was bottom up, not top down, not state directed. The colleges had bits of land, and they turned them. Two of them turned them into science parks, and the science parks took off. And you had key individuals, about 10 of them, perhaps in the early days, not led by, but most prominent among them being Hermann Hauser, who, and you had ARM take off here again, fortuitously perhaps, how they did it, but they did the right thing, it turned out, with their license model, and created a very powerful sort of how would you say, the image of Cambridge was constantly being renewed by these companies emerging and attracting capital, and so this is not repeatable in Japan, full stop. So it ain't going to happen there. The downside to Cambridge is that it is a bit of a bubble. It is starting, and we're very excited to see if it can go any further to take its lessons northwards or wherever inside the UK. That's being done through certain, Cambridge Innovation Capital is quite keen on that, sharing their learnings, putting investment through Northern Gritstone, for example, into the northern universities. So there are lessons that they can take from Cambridge, but they're a little bit limited. And it's all about entrepreneurialism and capital and the culture and the freedom and the excitement. We're very keen to see how we can make that Cambridge experience real in a place like Sheffield, Manchester, Newcastle, Cardiff, even Bristol, which is a little bit more exciting perhaps already. But so if that helps.
No, thank you very much, Alex. Now, before we dive deeper, I'd like to take a moment to tell our listeners a bit more about Parisi. Parisi are specialists in communications, helping organizations achieve their commercial objectives, whether that's raising their profile, boosting their revenue, or attracting new clients and investors. We combine traditional PR and public affairs engagements with marketing and content-led strategies, focusing on developing the outcomes our clients need, not just ticking the boxes. Now, Alex, you spent decades working with investors, engineers, investors, everyone working around sort of the deep tech sector. Now, let's look at the UK today. Do you think we're doing enough to champion industrial innovation? And when I say we, that could be governments of all colours, or investors, or the City of London.
Industrial innovation. Yeah, innovation is in my mind a bit, partly because it's so overworked, and it's in that slightly negative context. It's in my mind, has come into my mind fairly recently, because I think I sense among the people, Bessemer members, if you like, and those I interact with quite a bit, that there's a sense, and has been for a while now, that we're covering the innovation space, fine. In fact, we haven't got a problem there. The low TRLs, the sort of getting a company into the seed stage of funding and priming it for Series A. But when you tack innovation to industrial innovation, that seems to imply something that's further down the TRL into the manufacturing space. And this is what is also called scale up. But scale up has become in our world, which is hard tech, obviously around manufacturing itself primarily, is the capital expenditure associated with manufacturing, which means a quantum or an order more of funding is required to move from lab scale to a factory scale or fab scale. And that's the frustration, I think. I read the word for the first time for some reason. It might be going around a bit, but innovation economy. So we can take pride in the fact we're an innovation economy, but I'm concerned that we're a very poor industrial economy. There's a gap there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And if you think about our history, how can lessons from the 19th century, the Henry Bessemers, 19th century industrialization inform how we back industry today? Let's move industrial and let's move to industry.
Well, of course, again, the culture has changed. The world has changed. I wouldn't say the culture, the world has changed. The culture is interesting, perhaps, insofar as perhaps in the 19th century, it was very exciting. New industry, new technology was developing rapidly. Bessemer being a great example with his steel invention. I think the country was probably somewhat on fire technologically, and so it was positive. There was an optimism. But if you fast forward to the 1990s onwards, we've just been through a hollowing out deindustrialization, and we seem to have failed on broadly almost in every industry. We've maintained our position in aerospace, high-end automotive, pharmaceuticals, perhaps, and there'll be other niches, but compared to the 19th century, we don't have the complete waterfront that we had there and that we developed through on the back of that late industrial revolution. So what can we learn from the 19th century? I think we need to have firstly, to recognize that, yes, we've got the innovation space, and how do we industrialize it? And when we see examples of success, which is very much Bessemer's, you called it a communicator, we very much, and like yourself, Nick, for that matter, very much want to communicate those successes to change the culture in favor of the excitement and upside that there is around hard tech, innovation, and make it exciting for people at university to maybe want to have a spin out of a company or go into industry where there's opportunities and go work in companies that are doing exciting things and just see that's an exciting career path. So it's an educational thing in part as well.
And just, let me just go on a little tangent here. My libertarian friends would always point out to me that the 19th century industrial revolution was driven by private markets, private equity, going into it. The train lines, the railways, even the empire was built by private enterprise. But then the flip side, if you look at the capital going into, China being the largest, that's state plan and state thing in there. But then it's all been flipped again. And if you look at space, it's been privatized. Elon Musk is putting his money in. But the common, sort of theme in that is capital. And the problem where I would maybe point to my libertarian friends is, well, there isn't necessarily the private capital to grow the industrial might. There has to be something from, some more state planning side of things. But then this takes us to how politics works, how the City of London works. And, I guess my question to you is, are we too focused on the short-term returns versus the long-term industrial value?
That's a good question, I must say. I think it's right that private capital did do all the things you said in the 19th century, and that freedom was very powerful. America took it forward and is still doing it very effectively in the internet, everything to do with digital and compute. But overlooked, and it's been pointed out now for several years by politicians, including politicians, that America has had a sort of guiding hand from the military, DARPA, going back forever, I suppose. And we'd be surprised to find out just how much direction of technology has taken place, including apparently the internet itself, which came through ARPA. I shouldn't say apparently, it did. So we, as it turns out, haven't learned. We've just stayed resolutely free and capitalistic from the 19th century, and America hasn't. It's got very lot of German genes in America, Italian genes in America, and other genes in America. So the British gene seems to be a different gene altogether. And so I think I think the present government is, and the previous government was recognizing it more and more. I mean, they did quasi-nationalize, if that's the right word, Sheffield Forgemasters. They had already decided to effectively nationalize Optric Semiconductors. Newport Wafer Fab was effectively taken into a form of government control, and so it goes on. So that is a form of direction that the government has both parties have an agreement there. British Business Bank and I think the new National Wafer Wealth Fund, sovereign wealth funds, are a new thing basically for UK in the last 5-10 years. And they're going to be supporting this form of interventionism and direction. And it's being led off, I think, by this idea of security, that, we're in a new world, and we're dealing with countries, particularly China and Asia to an extent, is a state capitalist. And we've got to take some lessons from the fact that this downward direction from the top is a way of trying to support and strengthen some of our key strategic industries. Joined up thinking across the capital space, the industrial space, the academic space needs to be tightened up.
I don't think the Bessemer Society will ever get the credit it deserves in working in those spaces, bringing those people together to communicate with each other about the importance of these innovations, and I mean bringing the support, city, political, commercial, to help them grow. And that's something we should change. But the fascinating thing, you have a front row seat of history here, Alex, and you're such a privileged position where you're really seeing the best and the brightest innovative companies spin out really early days, and you're seeing them on this journey of having a great, let's use the word invention, having the commercialization of how that then grows, and to put it in very simple terms, becomes part of our daily lives. I want you to get a crystal ball out now, Alex, and tell me what the world will look like maybe in 15, 20 years' time from the innovations and inventions you are seeing, over the last 10 years and continue to see come from, sort of UK university.
Well, I don't spend much time sort of stargazing, actually. I used to do that in the 80s. It's got quite complicated now with things that are basically outside my ability to understand them. Let's say quantum as a good example, perhaps, as to what the revolution quantum is claiming to herald. Mostly it seems to be around enabling us to do materials discovery, which could go into batteries, say, at a much greater extent than we can do now, and so on and so forth. So it's a powerful, and AI for that matter too, incredibly powerful enabling tools that kind of blow your mind. It's a bit like going back more like 20 years to the beginning of the internet and trying to imagine what it meant when you said, when people said, well, there'll be no bricks, it'll all be sort of digital. And you're thinking, yes, I can imagine it could be, but well, here we are today, and it actually is digital, and bricks are, passé, bits of history in many cases, sadly, to an extent, for the high street. But I have seen over the last 10 years some of our companies, Oxford Nanopore comes to mind, very exciting gene editing. It's in the real world now. There are people actually using it. They have real customers. It's a real business. It's got a big factory in Oxford making these instruments or units that customers buy and use. So that's the real world actually happened, and it's very exciting to see. Similarly with pragmatic semiconductors, it's very exciting. I've followed that company actually for not 20 years, 15 plus years. And, they have a big factory now that's outside Durham. That's very exciting, doing something completely unique. And no one actually has, to my knowledge, started to compete with them in this very thin film, flexible semiconductor material that can be used as a sensor or for processing data on any object. The internet of everywhere that enables. So this is real stuff, and those companies actually, they get our Lifetime Fellowship Award. The founders of those two companies have received it, which we do every year. And often we give it to somebody who's gone through successfully that cycle with an amazing disruptive technology that's actually gone into a factory, if you like, as opposed to still being talked about. There are a few things out there that, 10 years ago are still being talked about, and still there's an element of excitement about them, but they actually haven't got anywhere near a factory, if you like. So I'm afraid the Lifetime Fellowship Award is still kind of hovering my finger's still hovering over the keyboard, ready to send them you have been invited to, become a lifetime member if you wish. Yeah. So, but times aren't slowing down. So it's all moving forward at an incredible pace. But because we're hard tech, yeah, we're in the enabling space. It's not so much, I don't really know exactly how it's all going to work out, but we're interested in quantum chips, quantum supply chains. We may do a dinner actually this year on that. DCIT is concerned about the supply chain. It's all about what I call industrialization of the clever technology. There's a good article in the Times by a Bessemer member, Chris Balance, on this very point a couple of days ago. And, you've got to have an ecosystem to support it. It has supply chain, but what is a supply chain? It has to have a customer at the end of it and all the bits that take the enabling technology through to something that somebody's going to actually use. And that is our challenge. And as you kindly said earlier, that we bring all these elements together, and that's what we'd like to do in quantum. So, and other areas too.
Thank you so much, Alex. I've been Nick Connor, and you've been listening to The Communicators, an interview series by Parisi. If you have any questions for us or Alex, drop them in the comments, and don't forget to give us a like. Be sure to tune in next time. Thank you.